Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here for VideoCopilot.net, and welcome back to another very exciting tutorial. Today, we're going to be taking a look at creating some really cool deform effects inside of After Effects using Element 3D. So, let's go and take a look at what we'll be creating. So we've built this really unique deform effect using some of the new features in Element 3D version 2, specifically the deform effects. So now we can bend and twist and add 3D distortion to our model and really create some fun effects. And this particular effect is all based off of a simple sphere. So here are a few other ideas of what you can create using these effects. So we've got this sort of hypnotic tentacle monster. We've got the skeleton of that monster. Here's kind of a cool title treatment. And here's a few other examples. Got a gummy iceberg and some other fun stuff. Now, let's go and get started. First thing we'll do, let's create a new composition. Call this Deform, 720p, 10 seconds, looks good. And then let's go ahead and add a background. So we'll add a solid. We'll call this background, hit OK. Then let's come over here to the effects and presets and we'll type in ramp. Then we'll drag this onto our background. Then we'll come over here to the effects control, set it to a radial ramp, and let's move some of the points around. So we'll just kind of move this. And we'll set the start color to a bluish color. And the end color to like a really dark blue. That looks good. Then we'll add a color correction curves. And we'll just give it a little bit of contrast here. Next, I want to add another new solid. And this is going to be our Element 3D layer. So we'll hit OK. We'll come over here, type in Element. Take Video Copilot Element, drop it onto our layer. Then we're going to add some objects by going into the scene setup. So we'll click on that. And here's the new Element 3D version 2 interface. We can come up to the top here, add a sphere primitive. And we can move around here. We could change this to wireframe, see what that looks like, and see how many segments there are. There's also some tools to hide the grid, turn on the environment, and stuff like that. So pretty cool. We'll come over here. We'll drop down the object materials, select our material, and we'll scroll down. I want to change the base color to blue. So let's do something like that. And then we'll scroll down a little bit more to our reflectivity, and I'll set the intensity to about 50%. Now, the reflection looks pretty white, so I want to tint it a little bit of a blue color, and that will make it look a little bit more like a blue metal. We can hide the environment and kind of see what that looks like. All right, so this is looking good, but I want to make sure there's enough segments to do all of our deformation. So as I showed you before, if we change it to wireframe, there's not that many segments. So if we select our object, we can turn the segment amount up. So we could turn it up to maybe 36, and that'll create a lot more segments to be deformed. Now, we'll go and switch it back to shaded, and let me talk to you a little bit about the surface options. So if we come over here to the object and click on surface options, we can also scroll down. We can see we have a setting for the normals. Now, the normals is basically the surface of your object. Now in this case, it's automatically calculated. But anytime you add any deform or bending or twisting, we want to make sure it's set to dynamic. And that way it updates every time the mesh is manipulated. So we'll set it to dynamic and we'll turn the threshold up to say 180. And that's just going to make sure everything is really smooth. The higher the number, the more smooth the polygons will be. Now, another useful tip is the optimize mesh. So if we look right here, there's 77,000 vertices. But if I turn on the optimize mesh, that goes down to 13,000. So that's a huge reduction, and that's going to speed up all your deformation because instead of having to move around 77,000 vertices, and the vertices are each one of these points, instead of having to move 77,000, it's only moving 13,000. And what it's doing is instead of storing a vertice for each one of these triangles, it's only storing one. So that should speed things up a bit. So we'll go ahead and switch it back to shaded. Now, the other thing you'll notice is that the group folder is set to output on group 1. So when we hit OK, we'll come up here to group 1 and we can make some of the changes to this object. So I'm going to go down to my particle look, go down to my deform settings, and scroll down a bit, and here we have our noise. So once we enable that, we can turn up the intensity. So now we're creating some cool looks. We can turn up the scale to make it a little higher frequency noise. We can also animate the evolution. Check this out. And that kind of creates kind of a bubbly effect. Now, in this particular case, I'm going to go down to the advanced settings, and I actually want to modify the XYZ value. So the noise is uniform, so it shoots out in all directions, but I can turn up the Y intensity, and that'll stretch it vertically. You kind of see what that looks like. And if we turn up our scale, we'll get a little bit more detail. All right, so that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and create a 3D camera. 35mm preset, we'll hit OK. And we'll take the camera orbit tool, and we can move around a bit. All right, so next I'll select the layer, and we'll go to our twist, turn that on, and again on our Y-axis, let's add a little bit of twist. All right, so our deform is looking good, but now let's play around with the render settings. So we'll close the deform, and we'll close the group, and we'll come down here to the render settings. So everything is really nicely organized so that you can jump into any specific thing you need. We're going to jump into the ambient occlusion. So we'll open that up, scroll down, and we'll enable it. And what this does is creates a little bit of shading in some of the crevices of our 3D objects. We can play around with the radius, which will change the distance of the ambient occlusion. We can also play around with the intensity and the gamma. Now, in the new version, we've added a couple of quality presets. And what this does is just changes some of the samples and quality. So I can change it to medium, and that'll automatically set the samples to 16 and the multi-sampling to 2. So it's just a really nice way to be able to quickly jump around the quality without having to go into all of the individual settings. So I think this looks pretty good. Go and close that. Now, another thing I want to touch on is the physical environment. With the new physical shaders, one of the most important things is our environment. So if I turn this on by showing it in the background, we can see that we have this kind of cool light room that's adding to the reflection of our object. So whatever our environment looks like will affect our 3D object. So if I turn up the exposure, that'll actually increase the brightness of our object as well. So we'll turn the background off, and maybe what we'll do is we'll play with it. We'll turn the gamma up a bit and just give it a little bit more contrast. The other thing we can do is rotate the environment. So if I turn it on to look at it, I can rotate it and move some of the reflective lights around. So we'll turn it off here and we'll just kind of move this around just to create some more interesting reflection and lighting. Now, the other thing we can do is tint the color of the environment. So I'm going to add a little bit of blue in there, and that looks pretty good. So again, we can add some contrast and really make it stand out, really punchy looking. That looks nice. All right, so we can go ahead and close that. Now, the other important thing is render quality. So we can go down to the output, and there's a few important settings I want to point out. So we have our multi-sampling. This is your graphics card sampling. So if your card supports 16, you can change that to 16. We also have the enhanced multi-sampling, which will clean up the edges even more. So if we turn that on, you can see that things are going to look even better. Kind of zoom in right here and look at that edge as we turn this on. And this will help you improve the quality. Now, the render speed is still really fast, but if you want to, you can come down to the render mode and set it to preview, and this will just keep the settings lower while you work, and when you're ready to render, you can switch it back up to full. So this is looking good. Maybe we'll darken our background just to give it a bit more contrast. All right, now this is looking pretty good. let's go ahead and play with the animation. So we'll go back to group 1, we'll go down to the Deform, and let's animate the intensity of the noise. So what we could do is move forward to about 3 seconds, and we'll set the intensity keyframe. Then we'll move back to 0 and set that to 0%. So now it's going to animate on just like that. Almost looks like it grows on, so that's pretty cool. So we can rotate the particle using the particle rotation, and we'll just rotate the Y rotation just like this. So I'll keyframe that rotation, we'll move back, and we'll set it to, say, -90 degrees. That looks pretty cool. And depending on what direction, so let's set it to 90 instead of -90. It'll actually look a little bit different, a little bit better maybe. It's all subjective, I guess. But if I say it looks better, then it's not subjective. The key is to really just play around with all of the settings. So we can animate the particle replicator. So we could set this to a ring and repeat the particle, say, 5 times. And now we've got 5 of these cool twisted objects, and we could turn the particle size down. So I know it seems a little bit confusing with all of the settings, but basically you have your replicator, and then you have the particle look. The particle look is basically the individual particle, and the particle replicator allows you to duplicate it. So if I change the scale of the replicator shape, that's just going to increase the ring size. But if I want to change the size of the particle, I'll just go into the particle look and turn that size down. All right, let me go ahead and just undo that. Now, it might be fun to add a quick title, so we could just type something in here, and we'll turn that off, and then go to Element 3D, and then we'll scroll down to the Custom Layers. So open that up, Custom Text, and we'll select the Twisted Text. So now if we jump back into the scene setup, and now we can go ahead and extrude that text. So here we can see the path is selected, custom path number 1, and we've got our 3D text. Now, what's going to happen if I hit OK right now? Well, let's find out. We'll hit OK, and it's twisted crazy, right? And that's because the object is inside of the same group folder on group 1. So there's a couple of different things we can do here. One, we could select our extrusion model, click on the advanced, and then turn off the enable deformation. So then if we hit OK, and now we can see the text is no longer deformed. But what I really want to do is take that text and put it on a new group. So the way to do that is just drag that object out of the group folder until it turns red, let go. And now that object is in the root, and you can see I can output it to a different group. So this time I'll just click on group 2, and now that's going to go out to group 2. Now if you want to use it as a particle replicator, you can just use this button to switch between a particle and a particle replicator for people who've used version 1. But anyway, this is set to group 2, and just make sure that if we go to the advanced, the enable deformation is back on, and then we can hit OK. So the good thing is now I can control the text on its own group. So if we open up group 2, I can rotate the particle, maybe turn it so that it's facing us. I can change the size of it. I can also move it around by moving the particle replicator position, XYZ, so I can move this around. But the really cool thing is I can add my own deform settings to the text. So if I go to particle look, then we can go down to the deform, scroll down to the bend, enable it, and now we can bend the text by itself. Now this isn't the direction, so we'll bend it and then change the direction to 90 degrees, and that way it'll bend into a circle like that. I'm going to go ahead and decrease the amount of bend and turn the particle size down. And we can also turn on the center mode, and then actually center the text around a circle. So if we were to rotate the particle now, watch this. Rotate. It's going to rotate and spin in a perfect circle. So that's what that center setting does. So it's just a handy way to recenter the particle around the center of the rotation. So there we go. And maybe what we could do also is go back into the setup and add just a little bit of illumination to this material. So if we go down to the bevel material, Now here we can control all of the bevel settings, so we can change the extrusion amount, make that deeper. We can play around with the size of the bevel, all that good stuff. Then we can go down a little bit further and turn on the illumination for the material and just brighten it up just a touch. And that will just make the front face, I'll set the Fresnel to like -1. It'll just make it a little brighter. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that if I am doing some other type of deform, I want to make sure that I have enough segments. So the S looks like it has a lot of segments in wireframe mode, but the T doesn't have a lot of resolution, so the deform is going to look a little bit blocky. So in order to add additional subdivision, we can do a couple of things. First, we can select the extrusion object. We can scroll down to the tessellation and set the depth segments up to something like 3, and that will add additional segments. Then the other thing we could do is click on Surface Options, and we have a subdivision amount. So we could set it to 1, and that'll subdivide every triangle. We could set it to 2 and get even more resolution. And then once you're good, just go ahead, turn on the Optimize Mesh, and that will try to reduce it as much as possible. So just keep in mind that this is a lot of triangles, so the key is to use as few as possible. So switch that back to shaded, and I don't think we actually need that many for this particular case for just a simple bend. So we'll go ahead and hit OK, and I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, pretty cool, and I invite you guys to play around with all of the different settings. Here's a couple of fun things you can try out. Let's say we take this group here, and let's duplicate all. And what that will do is create another group with the same exact copy. But on the second copy, what I'm going to do is change the material. So let's change it to sort of a gray material without a colored reflection. And let's set the glossiness down, so it's no longer a smooth material. It's kind of a rough looking, aluminum almost. And then we'll hit OK. Now, if we want to see that other object, we need to make sure we increase the particle count. So really quick, let me set this to a 3D grid. And now you can see that we have both of those particles rendering at the same time. Let's go ahead and set this to 1. Just do 3 like that. So we've got 3 of them side by side. But the noise pattern is exactly the same on each one. So what we could do is go down to the particle look, go to the deform, and turn on the randomize under the noise. And what that will do is randomize each one so it has a different unique seed. So that's really, really cool, because if I turn this off of 3D grid, just set it to a point and increase the particle count to 2, now we have 2 objects rendering in the same space, but because they have a different noise pattern, now we've created a really cool blend effect with those 2 materials at the same time. And just to give you one other fun thing to play around with, in the advanced settings, you'll see this exponent. And if we turn it up, what it does is creates a noise pattern that has higher values and lower values. So there's not that many in-between values. So this way you get kind of a more stringy looking effect. So if I turn off group 2 real quick, just disable that, we can see inside of the group 1 effect that instead of having all of the noise be really, really long, we actually have just a few stretched out spikes. So that's just a really cool, unique effect. And by the way, if you change the random seed, you're going to get a completely different look. So this is like such a fun way to build some cool effects. In fact, let's take it a little further. Let's turn the particle count up to 5. Then we'll open up the particle look, and let's turn up the particle size random. And what this will do is get rid of some of the overlapping. So if we turn this up a bit, and now we'll have different size particles, and they'll just overlap a little bit nicer. So that's cool. And also, if you change the replicator random seed, you'll change what color particles are, where. So there we go. We could turn on some random rotation. That's pretty wild. Again, this is what it's all about. Get in there, start experimenting, playing around. You can really create some very cool, very fun results. And that's basically what I did for all of these other examples. All right, guys, I hope you had a good time checking this out. We've added a ton of new features in Element 3D version 2. It's available now. We've got things like dynamic reflections, shadows, we've got all the Deform tools. There's a ton of cool stuff. So be sure to check it out, videocopilot.net. Thank you again for watching. I'm Andrew Kramer, and we will see you next time.